Introduction. Anxiety is a feeling of dread or apprehension. Oftentimes, it comes with no clear justification at all. It involves fear too, but it is distinguished from fear because, unlike fear, it does not simply arise in response to an actual and clear danger that has the potential to affect an individual's physical safety. Being threatened by an armed man, for instance, could result in feelings of fear. By contrast, anxiety arises in response to a rather harmless or innocuous situation, which is more often than not the product of internal emotional conflicts that are subjective and are caused by something that may not actually be apparent to the individual himself. Anxiety in general is considered normal. It's an inevitable occurrence that arises in the course of a person's daily life. There is, however, a type of anxiety that is persistent and intense, and can be considered as a chronic condition. This type of anxiety is recurring and cannot be justified as a normal response to real-life stresses. This is a sign of an emotional disorder. There is also a type of anxiety that is evoked by a specific object or situation. We all know this as phobia. On the other hand, if anxiety is one that persists but is not associated with any particular cause, like phobia or mental concern, it is referred to as general anxiety or free-floating anxiety. There are many causes for anxiety and psychiatric explanations as to what it is and why it occurs. According to Sigmund Freud, anxiety is a symptomatic expression of an individual's inner emotional conflict that is a result of the suppression of feelings, impulses, and experiences that are considered as too disturbing or threatening. Anxiety is also commonly viewed as something that arises from threats to a person's self-esteem or ego. A common example of such is the case of inadequate performance when it comes to sex or a job. Behavioral psychologists, on the other hand, view anxiety as a response to frightening events. When anxiety is produced by a particular circumstance, that anxiety is attached by the person to the circumstances surrounding it, so that such circumstances trigger anxiety in the individual whether or not it is attached to any frightening event. What's even more interesting is that the mere act of assessing stimuli as dangerous or threatening is enough to produce anxiety. Anxiety disorder is a different subject. Today, anxiety disorders are considered as the most common mental illness in the United States, affecting a staggering 40 million adults every year. While anxiety disorders are highly treatable, less than half of those who suffer from them receive treatment. This book will touch on anxiety as the body's natural response to stress, as well as on anxiety disorder that is often associated with depression. More importantly, this book will provide basic and practical steps to dealing with anxiety, how to reduce feelings of anxiousness, and how to manage stress to keep anxiety and anxiety disorders at bay. Anxiety versus stress. What's the difference? Before we move any further, let's first take a look at the difference between anxiety and stress. The reason is that the two share a lot of the same physical symptoms. This makes it difficult to spot the difference, but being able to do so is critical as it helps you determine which one to deal with. Looking from the outside in, it can be difficult for you to spot the differences between the two. Just like stress, anxiety can lead to lack of sleep and exhaustion. And, like anxiety, stress involves excessive worry, which often results in lack of concentration. Rapid heart rate, headaches, and muscle tension. All these affect a person who's experiencing either anxiety or stress. And since many of the symptoms similar to these ones appear interchangeable between the two, it can be a real challenge to know whether all you need at the moment is to take deep breaths or whether you should go and seek professional help already. That said, stress is generally a short-term experience, one that is simply a reaction of the body to a particular trigger. Stress can be healthy at times as well. In fact, there are times when stress is necessary for you to meet a deadline, and that's not negative. Stress becomes a problem, however, when it results in sleepless nights, lack of focus during the day, and an impaired ability to do regular tasks. In short, stress is a response to a threat in a given situation. On the other hand, anxiety is considered as a mental health problem with stress as one of its triggers. Unlike with stress, feelings of anxiety do not immediately go away as soon as the threat has been removed. With anxiety, thoughts of worry and fear hang around for quite a long time, even when there is no real threat. This causes significant impairment in a person's social and occupational functioning. There are a lot of physical and emotional disorders that are linked to stress. This includes depression, heart problems, gastrointestinal distress, obesity, hypertension, and, yes, anxiety. When stress is on a high level, it can wreak real havoc both in the mind and body. Stress itself can manifest in a number of ways. Here are some of the symptoms: recurrent headaches, lack of sleep, back pain, neck pain, lightheadedness, dizziness, sweaty palms, irritability, excessive worry, rapid heart rate, muscle tension, lack of focus, low energy, and poor memory. These symptoms can vary and change depending on the circumstance. Understanding how you respond to stress can greatly help increase your awareness, and this helps you manage future stress. Anxiety can be a little more complex. The feature that defines generalized anxiety disorder the most is excessive worry about a variety of events or activities. This may occur for several days or up to at least 6 months. The following are some of the most common symptoms: headaches, dizziness, pins and needles, stomach aches, shortness of breath, rapid heart rate, chest pain, excessive sweating, uncontrollable worry, difficulty concentrating, muscle tension, and sleep disturbance. Stress is a normal part of life, and no one is exempted from experiencing it. There are times, though, that stress can be very overwhelming and lead to anxiety. It's important to know how to manage stress, because when it is no longer manageable, other symptoms, including anxiety, may interfere with daily life. What part of the brain is responsible for anxiety? Fear and anxiety are two things that everyone experiences at some point in their lives. While fear is an immediate response to a particular threatening stimulus, anxiety is actually less intense. Unlike fear, however, anxiety is more sustained. For instance, fear is what you experience if a snake suddenly slithered in front of you while you're on a hike. Anxiety, on the other hand, is what you experience by convincing yourself that you will encounter a snake even before you set out on your trip. In some cases, one can be anxious without really knowing the reason why. What the brain normally does is manage fear and anxiety, making sure that they don't interfere with an individual's daily functioning. If a threat is nearby, different regions of the brain work together to help one make sense of the threat, either by amplifying or quenching fear and anxiety. For many people, however, anxiety can be quite overwhelming to the point that it hinders them from functioning normally. This happens when the brain functions responsible for managing fear and anxiety begin to function inappropriately or even fail to function at all. This sets off a stream of irrational and inappropriate behaviors. And when anxiety is prolonged, it can then be diagnosed as a disorder that requires therapy. So what exactly is the part of the brain responsible for all this? With anxiety disorder, there seems to be an imbalance between the brain's thinking and emotional inhibitory regions. Until recently, scientists believed that the amygdala served as the seat of fear and anxiety. The amygdala is a marble-sized, almond-shaped gray matter inside the cerebral hemisphere, responsible for helping one experience emotions. Studies done on animal subjects have shown that a damaged amygdala resulted in unusually stoic responses even in the face of a scary or dangerous stimulus. In humans with anxiety disorder, experts thought that anxiety and fear were caused by a hyperactive amygdala. Today we all know that anxiety is not the result of the damage of a single region of the brain, but that of the constant chatter between several regions in the brain, referred to by scientists as the fear network. This means that no one region of the brain is responsible for managing anxiety. On the contrary, different brain areas interact with each other, and this influences how a person experiences anxiety. This can be explained by the fact that the brain is split into two parts, the cognitive and the emotional. The frontal lobe is considered as the cognitive brain. It's the region where all the thoughts and sensations come together as a unified experience. The emotional brain, on the other hand, is where the amygdala is located. Based on this explanation, anxiety occurs when signals coming from the emotional brain overwhelm the cognitive brain and enter the consciousness. If, for example, you can rationalize that wild animals are rare in the area you're hiking, then you're using your cognitive brain, and the network within that region does its job in regulating the emotional fear network so that the thought of being attacked by a wild animal, even before you go out there, doesn't stop you from actually going out. What amplifies fearful signals that come from the amygdala is the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, or the DACC, located in a particular region of the brain's frontal lobe. When patients with anxiety disorder were shown images of fearful faces, the activities in the amygdala and the DACC are increased, producing noticeable anxiety. People without anxiety, on the other hand, show little or no response at all. Meanwhile, another part of the frontal lobe, referred to as the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, seems to diminish the signals sent out by the amygdala. Patients with damage to this region of the brain have been found to experience anxiety more. All this because the amygdala is no longer regulated. With the use of fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, scientists have discovered that these particular regions in the brain become active whenever a person experiences anxiety, although it's not yet settled how these regions work together. Until now, scientists are working hard, doing their best to understand how anxiety and anxiety disorders work. It's a good thing that most patients with anxiety respond well to drug therapies. Some find behavioral therapy to be beneficial. One such therapy involves exposing patients gradually to certain stimuli that trigger their anxiety. Through this method, patients learn to overcome their anxiety over time. Scientists and psychiatrists are also working together to pursue newer ways to treat anxiety, taking advantage of recent findings. And since levels of anxiety and anxiety disorders vary from individual to individual, some scientists make use of fMRI brain scans to find out which therapy works best for a particular type of patient. Finally, some make use of deep brain stimulation techniques to nudge brain regions that induce anxiety back towards a healthier state. What happens to the brain when you're anxious? Another important question to ask is what exactly happens to the brain when you're experiencing anxiety. We've already answered which region or regions of the brain are responsible for feelings of anxiety, and now we understand that anxiety is a result of the activity of several different regions of the brain and not just the amygdala. In a study done by the Departments of Neuroscience and Biomedical Engineering at Washington University, a team of researchers led by Ilya Monosov, Ph.D., found that specific cells in the brain are activated whenever a person feels anxious. Rhesus monkeys were used as subjects since their brain structure is very similar to that of humans. In the study, the team focused on the ACC, or anterior cingulate cortex of the brain. We now know that this brain region plays a role in certain behaviors associated with uncertainty, which is a key driver of anxiety. During the study, 2 monkeys were trained to associate 3 geometric patterns with 3 different outcomes. One of the patterns involved an irritating puff of air in the face of the monkeys. Another pattern was associated with a 50% chance of getting the same outcome. The third involved no outcome. Dr. Monosov used MRI for the measurement of the neuronal activity in the monkey's ACC. The team discovered that there were certain brain cells within the ACC that were activated whenever the third pattern was used, the one with an uncertain outcome. On the other hand, when the subjects were shown patterns associated with the 50% chance of an outcome, no activity was observed in the brain cells involved. What the researchers found was that there was a population of neurons that activated every time the subjects thought something bad was going to happen, but they weren't certain about, which in this case was a puff of air to their faces. In a similar test, Dr. Monosov trained the subjects to recognize patterns associated with the possibility of the monkeys being given a sip of juice, a positive outcome. The results they got were similar to the first experiment. When the monkeys were given a pattern with an uncertain outcome, a specific group of cells located in the ACC were activated. These cells, however, were not activated when the subjects were presented with a pattern that has a certain outcome. Dr. Monosov concluded that these findings are very important, as they will explain how the brain works during anxiety. In the same manner, the findings may open doors for new treatments not only for anxiety, but for related behavioral disorders as well. Symptoms of anxiety and its effect on the body. Most people often think of anxiety as something that's only in the head. But while anxiety is indeed activated through particular regions in the brain, it doesn't end there. Its effects are very much felt by the person experiencing it and are even seen by observers sometimes. If you have anxiety problems, you might feel worried and nervous frequently, or become afraid even about ordinary events. These feelings can be difficult to manage and can result in frustration. In the long run, anxiety can make daily living a challenge and can produce physical symptoms. Many are aware of the effects of anxiety on a person's mental health, but not a lot are aware of its physical side effects. Upset stomach, breathing problems, muscle ache, and fatigue. These, along with the decrease in the function of cardiovascular, respiratory, and even urinary systems, are some of the few negative things anxiety can bring to the body. Breathing problems. Anxiety is usually accompanied by hyperventilation, wherein one's breathing becomes rapid and shallow. This is normal as hyperventilation allows your lungs to catch up by taking in more oxygen and transporting it quickly around the body. The additional amount of oxygen actually helps the body prepare to either fight or feel. Hyperventilation can make a person gasp for breath, and when this happens, it can cause dizziness, lightheadedness, weakness, and the feeling that one is about to faint. Heart response. Anxiety can also cause changes to the cardiovascular system, particularly the heart rate and the rate of blood circulation in the body. Again, this is a normal result of anxiety, increasing blood flow and pumping more oxygen and nutrients to different muscle groups, making it easier for one to fight or flee. The blood vessels may narrow when a person is anxious. This is referred to as vasoconstriction. This can affect body temperature, causing someone to experience hot flashes. The body will begin to sweat to cool down when this happens. Long-term anxiety, however, is not good for cardiovascular health. According to some studies, anxiety can increase the risk of different types of heart problems in otherwise healthy individuals. While the association between anxiety and cardiovascular disease has not been fully studied yet, some experts believe that the connection is strong. According to Dr. Una McCann of Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, anxiety disorders play a major role in cardiovascular disease. She said that anxiety is a contributing factor to and an obstacle in recovery from heart disease at the same time. When a person is anxious, their body reacts in a number of ways that can place an extra strain on the heart. The effects of anxiety can be especially damaging if the person has an existing heart problem. Anxiety may have an association with heart problems, such as the following: tachycardia or rapid heart rate. In serious cases, tachycardia can interfere with normal heart function. It can also increase the chances of a person suffering from a sudden cardiac arrest. Decreased HRV or heart rate variability. This could result in a higher chance of death after an acute heart attack. Increase in blood pressure. If this case is chronic, it can lead to coronary disease and heart failure. Anxiety disorders can also affect heart attack recovery. These disorders often come with high degrees of fear, and this can affect the judgment of a person recovering from heart attack or any heart disease. This can have a major impact on their recovery. Impaired immune function. According to one study, there may be a relationship between anxiety and the immune system. Anxiety can actually help boost the immune system in the short term. Prolonged anxiety, however, can affect the immune system in the opposite way. Chronic anxiety can increase cortisol levels in the body, just as increased levels of cortisol as a result of stress can lead to anxiety. There's a good reason for cortisol to weaken the immune system. During periods of stress, particularly intense ones, cortisol works by reducing inflammation. It does this by weakening the antibodies that increase inflammation. It also activates the body's ability to fight off problems and moves away resources from the body's ability to prevent common diseases. In this manner, cortisol is beneficial to the body. Cortisol is only valuable in short bursts, though. When stress is prolonged as a result of anxiety, the body will need an increase in T cell and white blood cell activity. But unfortunately, these substances are suppressed by the presence of cortisol, thus incapacitating the immune system over time. This won't simply increase your chances of getting ill. This will happen if you come into contact with germs and bacteria. However, the main problem is that once you do get sick, your body will have a more difficult time fighting off the illness and recovering from it. It will need the presence of necessary cells to defend your system against intruders. But with anxiety taking its toll on your immune system and causing the prolonged release of cortisol, there's just no way your body will be able to keep up. Some evidence also shows that people suffering from allergies are more prone to experiencing anxiety. This becomes a cycle because as anxiety is prolonged, the immune cycle is weakened, leading to the sufferer being more susceptible to allergies. Scientists aren't clear yet why this is the case. There are theories saying that this takes place at a molecular level, although it's possible that the allergies and illnesses themselves increase the occurrence of anxiety, making life more difficult. The immune system does not cause anxiety per se, but it can contribute to behaviors that lead to anxiety. That said, people with chronic anxiety are more likely to acquire a cold, the flu, and other related types of infection. Reduced digestive function. It's not a surprise that anxiety has a huge impact on digestive health, considering the reality of the gut-brain connection. The two are in constant communication with each other, and, in fact, scientists say that there are more neurons in the gut than there are in the entire spinal cord. The gut is in part controlled by the central nervous system. The lining of the gastrointestinal system has a network of neurons, which is why scientists refer to the gut as the second brain. When you're stressed, the sympathetic nervous system responds to it by triggering what is known as a fight or flight response. This releases cortisol, making the body more alert and prepared for action. This causes physiological changes, increasing your state of awareness, your heart rate and breathing rate, your blood pressure, and your blood cholesterol levels. It also increases muscle tension. At the same time, stress caused by anxiety can produce changes in the digestive system. For instance, it may cause your esophagus to go into spasms. It may also increase acid production in your stomach, resulting in indigestion. Moreover, it may give you either constipation or diarrhea, and may also cause you to feel nauseous. More serious cases of anxiety and stress may also cause a decrease in the flow of blood and oxygen to the stomach. This could result in cramping and inflammation, as well as an imbalance of gut bacteria. More importantly, it can worsen disorders already present in the gastrointestinal tract. This includes irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and peptic ulcers. The following are a few more ways anxiety may affect digestive health. Acid reflux. One way chronic anxiety can affect digestive health is acid reflux. When you're always anxious, you may notice that you have trouble digesting food, particularly those high in acids, all the time. This is because anxiety increases acid production in the stomach, producing heartburn at the same time. Abdominal cramps. High-functioning anxiety can also cause you to experience abdominal cramping on a regular basis. Again, the reason is that anxiety puts your stomach under stress. During times of heightened anxiety, you will notice that your stomach will cramp out of the blue. This is a sign that you need to take a break from whatever is stressing you out. Diarrhea. Diarrhea is another common possibility for someone with high-functioning anxiety. Anxiety can increase one's chances of getting nervous and stressed before big events. Stress produced by anxiety can wreak havoc on your digestive system, causing contractions to increase. Sometimes, no matter how well you cope, anxiety can be overwhelming, resulting not only in butterflies in the stomach, but diarrhea as well. Vomiting. Chronic anxiety can affect a chemical in the brain called norepinephrine. This substance acts primarily to increase the rate and force of heart contraction, as well as the force of skeletal muscle contraction. When there's an overproduction of norepinephrine, one of the common symptoms is vomiting. Norepinephrine slows down the flow of blood to the gut, as well as the release of digestive enzymes and gastric juices. Aside from vomiting, another symptom caused by an overdose of norepinephrine is the feeling that you have a huge rock inside your stomach. It's like having nausea that simply won't go away. And finally, constipation. Finally, anxiety affects the digestive system by giving you constipation. The thing about chronic anxiety is that it causes stress that, though low level, sticks around for a long time. This can lead to symptoms you might not even think of as something that's related to anxiety, and that includes constipation. This is caused by a constant release of stress hormones that reduces the flood of blood going to the gut, slowing muscle contractions that lead to constipation. Urinary tract problems. It might come as a surprise to many, but most problems people have with their urinary tract are caused by none other than chronic anxiety. One way anxiety can affect the urinary tract is by causing you to urinate without your control. It's not entirely clear why this is so, but anxiety does increase the urge for one to urinate. Perhaps the main reason is that when you're anxious, your body activates its fight or flight response. Anxiety seems to activate different systems in your body simultaneously to the point that you lose control of some of them. When you're very anxious, for instance, your limbic system will trigger your muscles, heart, and lungs, plus some other systems necessary for you to either fight or feel. Unfortunately, the region in the brain that controls urination shuts down during this entire process, which is why you'll often see someone peeing on their pants as a result of too much fear or excitement. It is a very common occurrence among individuals with phobias, since it takes severe fear to promote this kind of reaction in the body. Nevertheless, it's not unusual for other people to experience it as well. It's also important to note that the opposite thing could happen to some people. As a result of extreme fear, some individuals find it impossible to urinate, which is probably caused by the same reason. Urinating more often than usual is the most common urination problem faced by people with chronic anxiety. It's a feeling of needing to urinate all the time, sometimes up to 15 times in one day. The problem is often associated with diabetes, which explains why people who experience this symptom would quickly think they have diabetes and not because they have an anxiety problem. Again, this can relate back to the activation of the body's fight or flight system. The need to urinate constantly can be observed in people who have general anxiety disorder and panic attacks. The body might be attempting to control urination, but for some reason it can't, causing the person involved to urinate all the time. Pressure is another likely cause. When you're under stress and are anxious, your muscles tense up, placing more pressure than usual on the abdomen, affecting the bladder. This may be a reason that you want to urinate more often. There's no fixed explanation yet as to why this happens, although this symptom is often observed in many people suffering from anxiety. As mentioned, there are also instances when urinating seems impossible. You feel that you need to urinate, but nothing seems to come out. A possible reason is that when the fight or flight system is activated, the brain center and muscles responsible for controlling urination do not work properly. On the other hand, it's also possible that there's really no need to urinate, but that anxiety makes the person feel like there is a need to. Anxiety doesn't cause the body to produce more urine, though, which is why when you're feeling anxious, you may go to the bathroom because you feel like you need to pee, only to find out that you can't. Of course, these are just possible symptoms of chronic anxiety. If you're worried that it could be something more serious, it's very important to check with your physician right away. Memory loss. Your memory can be affected whenever you are under periods of anxiety and stress. The same is true when you're experiencing any kind of disturbance in your mood. If you have some kind of significant anxiety disorder, it's not unlikely for you to have your memory functioning at a much lower level than usual. The brain is composed of several different memory systems, each functioning in different levels of capacity. Our long-term memory system, for instance, helps us remember details from the past. Our working memory, on the other hand, helps us remember information as we work with it. This type of memory is critical as it guides us as we solve simple to complex problems, as well as help us manage current bits of information. Once this system ceases to operate at a normal level, it could lead to difficulty in completing even the simplest tasks. It can also lead to loss of focus and concentration on all levels, as well as problems with multitasking. What's interesting is that problems with working memory are often influenced by worry and anxiety, and this can cause a lot of major problems not only with work, but also in your personal life. Chronic anxiety can cause damage to the working memory, causing you to miss important tasks. It also causes you to have trouble balancing everything you need to accomplish both at home and in the workplace, leading to a cycle of mistakes. Research going back as far as the 70s has also shown the relationship between anxiety and working memory. According to studies, when people experience anxiety, particularly those at high levels, the working memory is the one that's first to suffer. For people with high levels of worry or chronic anxiety, this means that their ability to solve complex problems, such as creating strategies or making decisions, is compromised. Stress in itself is not bad, as it helps you confront situations that are life-threatening. Every day, anxiety also helps you remember things better. This, according to a study published in Brain Sciences. In the study, participants were separated into two groups. One group composed of people with low levels of anxiety, and another group composed of those with high levels of anxiety. The comprehension of the two groups was tested, mostly on spelling and word meaning. Researchers found that the two didn't differ much on memory performance. However, it was discovered that the group with higher anxiety levels was able to remember words associated with negative images. This study verified the fact that emotional content can fortify memories. Nevertheless, it's also important to remember that this effect has a certain limit to it. According to the study, there's an optimal anxiety level that benefits the memory, and that high levels of anxiety can in fact cause a person to reach a tipping point. Once this tipping point is reached, anxiety becomes detrimental to both memory and performance. High levels of anxiety can also exhaust the body and offset the benefits associated with stress response. In the same way, it can lead to many physical problems, including headaches, heart attack, and even stroke. Moreover, it can cause negative psychological effects, such as with the memory. The link between anxiety and memory loss. Stress response can shed light on how high levels of anxiety can cause memory loss. When the body reacts to life-threatening situations, the brain's electrical activity increases, and this produces cortisol and adrenaline. If that process occurs when anxiety and fear are excessive, memory loss can most likely take place. The reason is that both anxiety and stress can deplete the body of its resources. A study published by the International Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry found that anxiety is inseparable with memory loss. The study showed how anxiety can be an early predictor of cognitive decline and cognitive impairment. People with anxiety disorders like panic disorder, phobias, and generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, have a high risk of developing memory loss. Another study, for instance, found that people with severe GAD had greater difficulty putting into remembrance attachment experience from childhood. It found that some adult anxiety may have its roots in childhood experiences that often leave a child uncertain of their future, or whether there would be an adult available for protection in times of trouble. The study explained that repressing traumatic experiences may lead to memory loss. There is still much to learn and understand about how anxiety is connected to memory loss. In fact, this is still an ongoing topic in many research projects. For instance, there is clear evidence in a study done recently that acute stress can disrupt the process responsible for the collection and storing of memories. In the study, it was discovered that short-term stress can activate certain molecules in the body that limit brain processes that involve learning and memory. Given that there is a link between stress and anxiety, it can be concluded that both long-term and short-term anxiety have an impact on memory. The amygdala and its role in anxiety. We've already mentioned how anxiety is influenced by different regions or pathways in the brain, one of which has something to do with the amygdala. If you are suffering from any form of anxiety, it will be of interest to you to understand how the amygdala works and how it is connected to anxiety. Perhaps you have read about the amygdala before, and there's a huge chance that you have an understanding of the amygdala being a single cluster somewhere in the brain. In reality, there are two of this section in the brain's temporal lobe, although they are generally referred to in the singular, thus the amygdala. This organ is part of the limbic system, which is responsible for regulating emotions. It also helps with memory, as well as a person's instinctual survival reactions. For instance, if it was your first time to encounter a bee and you suddenly got stung, you will remember in the future that bees do sting, and you will do all you can not to get stung again in the future. The limbic system is the part of your brain that helps you recognize that. The amygdala and the hippocampus. There are different parts that compose the limbic system, although the two most relevant to this discussion about anxiety are the amygdala and the hippocampus. While the amygdala is the one responsible for emotions, the hippocampus is the one that helps with the formation and strengthening of new memories, as well as the emotions associated or related to them. In the example about the bee, for instance, it's the amygdala that helps you sense the pain of the sting and the fear you felt when you got stung. On the other hand, it's the hippocampus that helps encode the image of the bug and the fear and pain associated with it into the memory. This is useful for survival because the next time you have an encounter with a bee or a similar-looking bug, your brain, particularly your amygdala and hippocampus, will match the image with the memory you felt when you first got stung. This will produce in you enough fear to avoid the bug. In summary, your amygdala will help you to feel fear, as well as alert or warn your autonomic nervous system to prepare the body for incoming danger. The amygdala and anxiety. In the previous example about the bee, there was a mention of a similar-looking bug. That's because the object of fear doesn't necessarily have to be the actual object itself. As long as the object is similar in appearance to the actual object of fear, the brain will still perceive it to be dangerous, sending signals to your system that you feel fear, even though the object scaring you isn't a threat at all. Again, this is because the process of the brain alerting your body to prepare for danger is automatic. It doesn't take chances and will rather mistake something for being a threat and prepare the body for it than to be unprepared and suffer the consequences in the event that the threat was real. A person with a strong emotional reaction to a certain situation has a higher chance of their experience to get stored in long-term memory as something that is harmful. This is why some people react more fearfully to something, even if it isn't harmful at all. If you've been stung by a bee in the past, for instance, you may develop a particular fear of flying bugs, even if those bugs do not have stings in the first place. In this case, you're getting an anxious response to prepare yourself for something that harmed in some time in the past. A very important point to note here is that if you have been hurt or threatened in the past, that experience will produce a very strong emotional reaction in you. And the stronger the emotional reaction, the higher the chance that the experience will be stored in your memory as something that is unpleasant or one with the potential to harm you. Let's say you have a panic attack in a certain location, like inside the restroom, for instance. The entire experience will give you a strong emotional reaction, and your brain will remember the ordeal. A possible effect is that your brain will match the restroom as something that's unpleasant, or even dangerous. As a result, the next time you are in a restroom with similar interiors as the one you had the panic attack in, there's a huge chance that you will experience the same level of anxiety that you had the last time. Again, this is the result of the original panic attacks you had producing strong emotions such as fear and terror. It's also a result of your hippocampus taking notes and remembering details for you in case you experience something similar in the future. If this is the case with you, you need to understand that conventional models of therapy that usually focus on thought process may not work, because such models usually miss the fact that the panic sets automatically the moment you are triggered. You don't even have to have another panic attack for the anxiety to set in. How the amygdala creates fear. The amygdala doesn't actually create fear, but in the manner that it is related to the emotions, it would seem that way. This process is actually not that complicated, but it does produce a chain reaction. The first stage involves the amygdala sending a signal or nerve impulses to the hypothalamus once it decides that you are facing a threat, be it a man pointing a weapon at you or an angry dog running toward you. In turn, the hypothalamus activates the pituitary gland, which then activates the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland then secretes adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol, hormones that activate the body's fight and flight response, as well as trigger fear. The hormones released by the adrenal gland also produce a number of changes in your body, which make you feel fearful. This includes your heart beating faster, which increases your energy level and prepares your body for action, your blood pressure increasing, your breath getting faster, your blood sugar increasing, your vision tunneling, and the rate of blood flowing to your muscles increasing. All these changes triggered by your body's fight or flight response are normal and take place to prepare your body to protect itself from danger. They all help you respond successfully to any danger that may happen. However, when the fight or flight response occurs and persists even in the absence of actual danger, the result is persistent anxiety that eventually becomes the root of a number of anxiety disorders. A number of treatments have been introduced to treat anxiety, including mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy. But why do we need to understand the amygdala and its role in anxiety? Will it also help us to treat anxiety? In a way, yes. A number of exciting research results suggest that training the amygdala to respond to positive memories more will soon be possible through biofeedback technology. This therapeutic technique utilizes fMRI or EEG to show the state of amygdala of patients. This will allow people suffering from anxiety disorders to learn techniques to help them increase or decrease the level of anxiety of their amygdala. Such technology is still in the beginning stages, but there's a huge chance that it will be available to the general public soon. The cortex and its role in anxiety. As mentioned earlier, anxiety is influenced by a network or pathway of regions and not the amygdala alone. One of these pathways is the cerebral cortex. Studies have shown that anxious individuals have their prefrontal cortex function operating abnormally. It seems that the prefrontal cortex inhibits the amygdala. In individuals suffering from panic disorders, phobias, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, an underactivity of the prefrontal cortex has been observed. This underactivity disinhibits the amygdala. On the other hand, there seems to be an overactivity of the prefrontal cortex in individuals with generalized anxiety disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Understanding the cerebral cortex. The word cortex comes from the Latin bark, which appropriately describes the cortex, being a layer made up of primarily gray matter. It is the outermost layer of the brain and is the most prominent and visible feature of the human brain. It's only a few millimeters thick, but it comprises half of the brain's weight. The cerebral cortex consists of an extensively folded surface that forms ridges referred to as gyri, as well as valleys called sulci. The ridges and the valleys play an important role in how the cortex functions. The folding of the surface, in particular, makes sure that there is always room for more neurons. The cerebral cortex is divided into two hemispheres by the medial longitudinal fissure. It forms extensive connections with the brain's subcortical areas and is therefore involved in almost all functions of the brain. To simplify matters of what the cerebral cortex is, one can say that it is characterized by three categories of areas: association, motor, and sensory areas. The sensory areas are the areas that receive information related to sensation. Various areas of the cerebral cortex specialize in dealing with information coming from different sense modalities. The primary somatosensory cortex, for example, which is located in the post-central gyrus, receives information from the body regarding tactile sensations. It also processes information related to touch, such as pain and temperature. Other areas, on the other hand, are devoted to the processing of information related to vision, hearing, taste, olfaction, and the vestibular senses. The motor areas are involved in movement and are found primarily in the frontal lobe, which includes the primary motor cortex, premotor cortex, and the supplementary motor cortex. The primary motor cortex is the one that gives rise to the fibers making up the corticospinal tract, the main pathway for voluntary movement. The two other cortices play very important roles as well, although it is not exactly understood how they contribute to movement. The sensory and motor areas play a critical role in healthy cognition and behavior. But what do the association areas do? The association areas are extremely important too. They are spread across the cortex and are involved in the process of information integration from different regions of the brain. This process of integration adds complexity to the perception attained with a particular sense modality. It can also facilitate complex cognitive processes, including artistic creation, language, and decision-making. The cerebral cortex and anxiety. A person's abilities to process thoughts, imaginations, memories, logic, planning, and sensations are all located in the cerebral cortex. In addition, the meanings that a person attaches to thoughts and sensations are associated with the cerebral cortex. The brain is amazing because it allows one to imagine what the future could be like, but at the same time, it's that ability that causes one to envision any number of unpleasant or negative outcomes. It's that ability to form images, anticipate, and interpret things that creates anxiety even though there is no actual threat. For instance, when the phone rings, you automatically assume that the caller is going to deliver some bad news. You then feel anxious as you pick up the phone, only to find out that the caller dialed the wrong number. This is exactly what cortex-based anxiety looks like. The process of linking of thoughts to particular experiences is a result of what is referred to as cognitive fusion. One example might be the thought or belief that mingling with people in a crowded place will cause you to have a panic attack. Such a thought is likely to activate the amygdala and give rise to the uncomfortable physical sensations usually associated with anxiety, including rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, and sweating. Cognitive fusion takes place when thoughts are misinterpreted as facts. For instance, if you are bothered by scary thoughts, or if you think that things are going to get worse if you don't think about them, you are actually fusing thoughts with experience. This is a very common occurrence, and is the reason why psychologists stress the importance of challenging and questioning one's thoughts. Managing the cortex. The amygdala responds to certain thoughts in the same exact manner that it does to actual events. What this means is that you can have a significant amount of control over your anxiety simply by reducing the amount of time you spend thinking of anxious thoughts. You always hear the expression, "Don't worry about it." This advice may sound cliché, but it actually does make a lot of sense. Take a person with agoraphobia, for instance. It's the fact that such person takes anxious thoughts seriously and spends time on them that prevents them from stepping outside for fear that they'd have a panic attack or even a heart attack. The key is to learn how to acknowledge thoughts without having to necessarily buy into them. This requires that one develops a way to act as an observer rather than a believer when viewing their thoughts. This technique is referred to as cognitive restructuring. This process involves learning to become suspicious of thoughts that generate anxiety and then challenging them with evidence. For this to work, however, it's important for one to pay attention to biased thinking, as well as to learn to identify recurring thoughts. Replacing anxiety thoughts with more realistic ones repeatedly will eventually produce significant results, because doing so will literally change the brain's circuitry. Synapses in the cerebral cortex are wired very precisely. As you go about your business and worry comes your way, your brain will fire up a few neurons as a response. As more anxious thoughts come along, your brain will think that they are of great importance and will commit more resources to firing up more neurons. The connections made by the brain will gradually become more robust, and before too long, your brain has established a stable neuron structure for worry. In the past, experts thought that the brain has little capacity to adapt and change as we age. Now we know that this isn't necessarily the case. In fact, the brain is very much capable of adapting to new circumstances. This is very interesting because it means that human beings have a good amount of control over their anxiety if they simply choose to exercise it. Anxiety disorders. Occasional anxiety is a normal part of life. When faced with a problem at home, school, or work, you might feel anxious. Anxiety disorders, on the other hand, involve more than passing worry or fear. A person who has an anxiety disorder has a form of anxiety that doesn't simply go away, but actually has the potential to get worse over time to a point that it interferes with life. It's not always the case, but people with anxiety disorders that are left unmanaged usually perform poorly in school or at work, and usually have unhealthy relationships. Anxiety disorders are a form of mental illness. The distress they bring can keep a person from carrying on with a normal life. For a person with an anxiety disorder, worry and fear are a norm and can be overwhelming, sometimes even disabling. It is not fully understood what specifically causes anxiety disorders, but the following are considered to be the most possible contributors: genetic factors, psychological makeup, environmental factors, and a physical condition. A person may have gone through life with no anxiety disorder at all until one day they experience hurt and pain, such as the death of a loved one or a breakup of a long-term relationship that triggered stress and anxiety. Once that person's response to the stresses experienced is inappropriate, or if the person is overwhelmed by the experience, an anxiety disorder can develop. Anxiety can also run in families. Some doctors believe that the tendency could be inherited, although others think the behavior is learned. There are cases where anxiety is caused by a medical disorder, particularly by the use of a drug or withdrawal from it, used to treat that condition. Heart disorders, for instance, including heart failure and arrhythmias, can lead to anxiety problems. The same is true with hormonal disorders such as hyperadrenocorticism and hyperthyroidism. Lung disorders like asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease can also produce anxiety. Even fever can sometimes result in the development of an anxiety disorder. Types of anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders are divided into 5 major categories. The first is general anxiety disorder. Also known as GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, is a form of anxiety disorder characterized by exaggerated worry and tension. And this even when there's nothing to actually provoke it. People with this type of anxiety disorder may anticipate disaster and may be unusually and overly concerned about family, work, health, and money, among other issues. They find it very difficult to control their worry and may worry even more than what is warranted about actual circumstances. They may also expect the worst even though there's no apparent reason to be worried in the first place. GAD is diagnosed when an individual finds it seemingly impossible to control worry on most days for at least 6 months, with 3 or more accompanying symptoms. This is what differentiates GAD from worry that's specific to certain stressors. In any given year, GAD affects 3.1% of the population in the United States. That's about 6.8 million adults, with women twice as likely to be affected. GAD comes on gradually and can begin on any period of a person's life, although the risk for developing GAD is between childhood and middle age. There is no exact cause for GAD, although there is evidence that biological factors, as well as family background and life experiences, play a role. With GAD, just the thought of having to go through the day can produce anxiety. Those suffering from this disorder do not seem to have control over their cycle of worry, even though they are usually aware that their worry is more intense than the circumstance warrants. Many people with GAD have a tendency to control situations. They believe that worry can help prevent negative outcomes, which is one possible reason they have a hard time giving it up. In many cases, this results in physical symptoms, including headaches and stomach aches. People with GAD can function well socially and even have meaningful lives, especially when their anxiety level is mild to moderate. Others with more severe cases, however, may avoid certain situations because they are aware of their condition. They sometimes miss opportunities, such as travel and promotion, due to their worry. Some even have difficulty carrying out the simplest tasks when their anxiety attacks. Treatment options for GAD. A number of treatments can help people with GAD, one of which is supportive and interpersonal therapy. The most researched approach for GAD, though, is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's designed to target thoughts as well as physical symptoms and behaviors, such as planning and avoidance and over-preparation that characterizes GAD. Mindfulness-based approaches have also been studied with significant results. The same is true with acceptance commitment therapy. Obsessive-compulsive disorder. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, is an anxiety disorder that involves having recurring unwanted thoughts and sensations that make a person feel driven to repetitively do something. The repetitive behaviors, such as cleaning things, washing the hands, or simply checking on certain objects, can greatly interfere with daily activities. It's normal for people to have repeated behaviors and focused thoughts, as long as those things do not affect the quality of a person's life, and as long as they don't make tasks more complicated. What is not normal, though, are thoughts that are persistent, resulting in unwanted routines and behaviors that cause distress when not observed. This is the case for people with OCD. Most people with OCD are aware that their obsessions aren't true, although there are those who think they could be true. This is known as having poor insight, so that even if people with OCD know that their obsessions are not true, they still have a difficult time stopping their compulsive actions, or at least keeping their focus off their obsessions. OCD is diagnosed when there is a presence of an obsession or compulsion that has become time-consuming, is causing major distress, and is hampering one's productivity at work or one's ability to socialize. In the United States alone, 1.2% of the population has OCD, with women having a higher tendency to develop the condition than men. OCD may begin to develop either in childhood, adolescence, or early adulthood, the average age of people acquiring it being 19 years old. Obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are thoughts that are recurrent and persistent. They are impulses or images that cause distressing emotions when not accommodated. A lot of people who have OCD understand that such thoughts and impulses are simply a product of their own thinking and are unreasonable and excessive. Nevertheless, these thoughts, intrusive as they are, simply cannot be settled by reasoning or by logic. People with OCD would often try to ignore their obsessions or replace them with some other thoughts. Typical obsessions involve having excessive concern about being harmed or contaminated, as well as having a need for exactness. Having excessive concern about religious thoughts is also a type of obsession. Compulsions, on the other hand, are mental acts or behaviors that are repetitive, actions that make a person feel driven to perform. The goal of such behaviors is to prevent or reduce distress felt by the individual as a result of obsessing over them. There are severe cases of compulsion wherein the person would be so obsessed with an action that it becomes a ritual. Some rituals can sometimes fill the entire day that it makes normal daily activities impossible. What makes things worse is the knowledge that the thought of going through the rituals is irrational. Completing a ritual may bring relief, but only temporarily. Soon the obsession returns and the cycle continues. The following are some examples of compulsions. Cleaning. This is done out of fear that germs or bacteria will cause contamination. The action can sometimes go on for hours, with the person washing or cleaning the surroundings to make sure they are 100% clean and free from possible contamination. Repeating an action. This involves uttering a word or phrase or repeating a behavior several times. The aim is to ease the anxiety or the worry that if the repetition is not done, harm or injury may occur to the person involved. Checking on things. The main aim of this action is to reduce the fear or worry of harming one's self or others. It's usually in the form of checking to make sure the doors and windows are locked at night to prevent burglary. It may also come in the form of checking the gas stove or electric appliances and gadgets over and over again. People who drive would retrace their driving routes just to make sure they haven't hit any person or animal. Arranging things. This is a very common form of compulsion wherein the person involved would make sure things like books or dishes are arranged in a symmetric fashion and in a certain order. Mental compulsions. These are responses to intrusive thoughts and may come in the form of a prayer or phrases that are repeated. The repeated prayers or phrases are aimed at reducing anxiety or the fear of a dreaded future event. Panic disorder. Panic disorder is an anxiety disorder that is characterized by recurring panic attacks. These panic attacks are more often than not unexpected. They are sudden urges of intense fear, and when they come, the individual involved may think and feel that they are losing control or even dying. The reason is that panic attacks overwhelm a person with dread that has no obvious cause. Panic attacks produce physical symptoms, including a rapid heart rate, sweating, and breathing difficulties. Most people experience a panic attack at least once in their lives. In the United States, 1 out of 75 people is at risk of acquiring a panic disorder, and this according to the American Psychological Association. A person is said to have a panic disorder if they develop a persistent fear of experiencing another panic attack after they have had one at least a month of persistent worry about additional or recurring panic attacks. Symptoms of panic disorder can be very overwhelming at times, but that does not mean that it cannot be managed. In fact, it can be improved with treatment, which is the most important way to reduce the symptoms. Symptoms of panic disorder. Symptoms of panic disorder may begin to appear in a person's teenage years, or any age before 25. If a person has had 4 or more attacks, they are living in constant fear of experiencing additional attacks after having one. The person is said to have a panic disorder. Panic attacks produce extreme fear that occurs with no warning. It can begin suddenly and last between 10 and 20 minutes. In extreme cases, the symptoms may even last for an hour or so. It's also important to understand that no symptom is the same for 2 individuals, although there are common symptoms that are associated with a panic attack. Some of these are palpitations or racing heartbeat, breathing difficulties, feeling of being choked, vertigo or dizziness, nausea and lightheadedness, shaking or trembling, sweating or chills, feelings of derealization, feelings of depersonalization, numbness and tingling of hands and feet, chest tightness and pain, having feelings that one is going to die. There is no clear reason why symptoms of a panic attack occur as they do. In most cases, the symptoms are never proportionate to the level of danger that can be perceived in the environment. And since the attacks cannot be predicted, they can significantly affect a person's functioning. In some cases, the fear of having a panic attack or simply recalling the experience of previous attacks can result in another one. Causes of a panic attack. Panic disorder develops when there's a recurring fear of experiencing a panic attack after a previous one. It's not clear, though, what exactly causes a panic attack. However, most experts agree that the tendency to have panic attacks can run in families. There's also a connection between panic attacks and major life transitions, such as leaving home for college, graduating from college, and having to look for a job, getting married, or becoming a parent. Severe stress caused by the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, or divorce can also trigger panic attacks. There's also a connection between panic attacks and certain medical conditions. If you're experiencing symptoms of a panic attack, be sure to see your doctor to rule out the possibilities of a mitral valve prolapse, a minor cardiac condition characterized by one of the valves of the heart not closing correctly. Try to find out as well if you have hyperthyroidism and hypoglycemia, since these two may influence a panic attack. Using stimulants like cocaine, amphetamines, or even caffeine may also cause a panic attack, and so does withdrawal from certain types of medication. Panic attack diagnosis. It's important to seek emergency medical care if you are experiencing symptoms of a panic attack. People who experience a panic attack for the very first time usually get the feeling that they are having a heart attack. As soon as you arrive at the emergency department, the staff will perform several tests to check whether or not your symptoms are a result of a heart attack. Blood tests and an electrocardiogram, ECG, may also be run to rule out conditions that can produce similar symptoms. If there is no basis for an emergency, the staff will refer you to your primary care provider. Your primary care provider will then perform a mental health check and ask you several questions regarding your symptoms. All possible medical disorders will be ruled out before a diagnosis for panic disorder can be made. As for treatment, the aim is usually to reduce or eliminate the symptoms. This can be achieved through therapy or medication in some cases. In terms of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is what's commonly prescribed. The main approach of CBT for treating panic disorders is to teach you to change your thoughts and actions in order for you to understand your panic attacks and to manage your fears. Medication used for the treatment of panic disorder often include SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, a type of antidepressant. SSRIs doctors usually prescribe include fluoxetine, sertraline, and paroxetine. Aside from these, other medications for treating panic disorder include serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, or SNRIs, benzodiazepines like diazepam and clonazepam, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or MAOIs, and anti-seizure drugs. In addition to these, other steps you can take to reduce your symptoms include exercising on a regular basis, getting enough sleep, avoiding use of stimulants, and managing your schedule. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or more commonly known as PTSD, is a mental health condition triggered by an event that caused extreme fear. It's either the person was the one directly involved in the incident or simply a witness to it. Most people associated PTSD with military combat in men and rape in women. However, any event that can cause an overwhelming feeling of helplessness and hopelessness that leaves a person emotionally shattered can result in PTSD. This is especially true if the person involved felt that the experience was unpredictable or uncontrollable. Symptoms of PTSD may include nightmares, flashbacks, severe anxiety, and uncontrollable thoughts relating to the experience. People who go through traumatic experiences may have difficulty coping and adjusting, albeit temporarily, and with time and proper self-care usually improve and recover. People with PTSD, however, have symptoms that get worse and last for months and years, interfering with the person's day-to-day functioning. PTSD symptoms. Symptoms of PTSD may vary from person to person and may develop differently. This is because people's tolerance for stress and their nervous systems also differ. A person will most likely develop PTSD symptoms within hours or days following a traumatic experience, but it can also take weeks, months, or even years before the symptoms appear. In some cases, the symptoms suddenly appear, unexpected. At other times, the symptoms are triggered by an object, an image, a word or phrase, or a smell that reminds you of the actual traumatic event. But while different people may experience PTSD differently, there are 4 main categories of symptoms to look for. Intrusive memories. This type of symptom involves re-experiencing the traumatic event through flashbacks, reliving the event as if it were happening in the moment. Nightmares, upsetting dreams about the event, and intrusive memories. Sometimes the symptoms are so strong that they cause intense physical reactions. Avoidance. Avoidance is often accompanied by numbing and involves avoiding things that may remind you of a painful and traumatizing experience. It also involves repressing memories related to the ordeal, as well as a loss of interest in day-to-day activities and feeling emotionally numb. This often leads to detaching oneself from others and having a sense of a limited future. Hyperarousal. Hyperarousal occurs when a person's body kicks into high alert all of a sudden as a result of remembering details of a traumatic event. Real danger may not be present, but the memories cause the body to act as if it is. This may include irritability, hypervigilance, sleep problems, angry outbursts, and reckless, self-destructive, and aggressive behavior. And finally, mood changes. It's very common for people with anxiety disorder to experience mood changes, to feel like one is alienated and alone all the time. Mood changes also include difficulty remembering things or concentrating when performing tasks. This often leads to feelings of depression and hopelessness, as well as feelings of guilt, shame, self-blame, and mistrust and betrayal. PTSD causes. Doctors are not quite sure why people could get PTSD. However, a person can develop post-traumatic stress disorder by going through or witnessing an event that involves actual or threatened sexual abuse, serious injury, or death. Just like most mental health problems, PTSD is most probably a result of a complex combination of the following: stressful experiences, especially those that have caused severe trauma; inherited mental health risks, including a family history of anxiety and depression; inherited temperament; and the way a person's brain processes chemicals and hormones released by the body in response to stress. Types of trauma. For many war veterans, the cause of PTSD is quite clear: the stresses of being in the war zone and witnessing the death of many. For them, returning from military service often means coping with PTSD symptoms. They would usually have a difficult time readjusting to life out of the military. They may constantly feel as if they are on the edge, emotionally disconnected, or close to exploding. Nightmares, flashbacks, depression, and feelings of anxiety and guilt are a constant enemy for military veterans with PTSD. Another type of trauma is one that has its root in childhood. This is categorized as psychological trauma, one that has been caused by an event or series of stressful events that left a person feeling helpless or emotionally out of control. Sometimes psychological trauma doesn't have to begin in childhood. Any event that shatters a person's sense of safety can leave them traumatized. It could be a serious injury, an accident, bullying, domestic violence, or the death of a loved one. A deeply humiliating experience can also lead to psychological trauma. And then there's trauma brought about by being raped or sexually assaulted. Nothing can be as shattering as this, and more often than not, it leaves a person scared and feeling alone and ashamed, plagued by flashbacks, nightmares, and haunting memories. Regardless of what type of trauma a person has, it's important to remember that it's possible to regain one's sense of trust, safety, and self-worth. PTSD risk factors. Not everyone who experiences something traumatic will eventually develop post-traumatic stress disorder. That said, PTSD symptoms are more likely to occur in individuals with the following risk factors. Previous traumatic experience. Individuals who have experienced a previous trauma, such as an accident, rape, physical abuse, or disaster, are more susceptible to PTSD. The stress brought about by the trauma can have a compounding effect, which means any new traumatic experience can worsen the effects of a previous trauma. This is especially true for individuals who have experienced early or childhood trauma. History of abuse. Those who have a history of being physically, emotionally, or sexually abused tend to have a higher risk for developing PTSD. Such experiences can result in so much trauma, and their effects can also exacerbate any additional trauma. Family history of PTSD. Individuals with a family history of PTSD, depression, and other mental health problems tend to be more susceptible to PTSD. Substance abuse. Individuals with a history of substance abuse are more likely to develop PTSD. Although it's not clear why, experts agree that it may have something to do with drug or alcohol abuse that interferes with a person's ability to cope with stress, particularly one resulting from a traumatic event. Poor coping skills. The level of a person's psychological functioning and their coping skills play a huge role in a person's susceptibility to PTSD. People with poor coping skills and psychological functioning have a higher chance to develop PTSD since they have little sense of control over circumstances and often blame themselves for the experience that caused the trauma. Lack of support. Research has shown how positive social and family relationships can help a person suffering from trauma manage their symptoms. People who do not have much support tend to be more vulnerable to stress and its harmful effects. And if they have experienced trauma in the past, they are more likely to be at risk for PTSD. Ongoing stress. Ongoing stress can cause damage to a person's physical and psychological health. It can reduce a person's ability to cope with trauma and therefore increase their risk of developing PTSD. Symptoms of PTSD can vary in intensity as time goes by. A person is more likely to have more symptoms when they are stressed, or when they come across triggers that remind them of the trauma they went through. For instance, a war veteran may relive combat experiences simply by hearing a car backfire. In the same manner, a person who has been abused may feel overwhelmed by memories of their own assault simply by seeing a report on the TV news or reading about it in the newspaper. It's important to be aware of your own symptoms if you feel that you have PTSD. If you are experiencing disturbing thoughts and feelings of a traumatic event that lasts over a month and are affecting your quality of life, go and see a mental health professional right away. The key to keeping PTSD from getting worse is to receive treatment as soon as possible. Social phobia, social anxiety disorder. Feeling nervous in social situations is normal. Going out on a date or giving a presentation, for instance, may cause someone to have butterflies in the stomach. In social anxiety disorder, however, everyday interactions deemed as normal cause significant amounts of self-consciousness, embarrassment, anxiety, and fear as a result of worry that one would be judged or scrutinized by others. Also known as social phobia, social anxiety disorder is often characterized by intense fear of being rejected in social situations. Individuals with this anxiety disorder may worry about appearing anxious, stupid, or boring. As a result, they would avoid performance situations, or if a situation cannot be avoided, would experience significant amounts of distress. Social anxiety disorder is considered as a chronic mental health condition, but learning the right coping skills as well as taking medications can help a person with the said condition to gain more confidence. Social anxiety symptoms. Just because someone feels shyness and discomfort in certain situations doesn't necessarily mean that they have social anxiety disorder. This is especially true among children. Depending on a person's personality traits and life experiences, comfort levels in social situations may vary. That said, some people are naturally outgoing, while others are simply more reserved. Unlike regular feelings of nervousness, social anxiety disorder includes anxiety, fear, and avoidance that interfere with a person's daily routine, school, work, and other activities. While this condition can start in childhood, it typically develops in the early to mid-teens. A person may have social anxiety disorder if they have persistent levels of the following: fear of situations wherein one may possibly be scrutinized and judged, worried that one would be embarrassed or humiliated, intense fear of talking or simply interacting with strangers, fear that people will notice one's anxiousness, fear of physical symptoms that may cause embarrassment, such as sweating, blushing, trembling, stuttering, or having a shaky voice, expecting the worst possible result of experiencing something unpleasant during a social situation. Children who may have social anxiety may cry, have temper tantrums, or cling to parents and refuse to speak when they have to interact with adults. On the other hand, when someone has a performance type of social anxiety disorder, they experience intense fear and anxiety only when they know they're going to speak or perform in public, and not in any other type of social event or situation. Physical signs and symptoms of social anxiety. Social anxiety disorder is accompanied by the following physical signs and symptoms: blushing, rapid heart rate, sweating, shaking or trembling, upset stomach and nausea, difficulty breathing, lightheadedness or dizziness, muscle tension, and having a feeling that one's mind has gone blank. Aside from these, people with social anxiety may find some everyday experiences difficult to endure. These are the need to interact with strangers or unfamiliar people, attending social gatherings like parties, going to school or work, initiating conversations, especially with strangers, making eye contact, entering a room with a meeting going on, dating, returning items to a store, eating in front of other people, and using a public restroom. The level of symptoms of social anxiety disorder may vary from time to time, but symptoms are sure to flare up if one is facing a lot of stress. However, while avoiding triggers and situations that may cause stress and anxiety may give temporary relief, the problem is likely to continue if the person involved doesn't get proper treatment. Ways to calm the brain and ease anxiety. Anxiety disorders are psychiatric disorders that need the attention of a medical professional, particularly one whose field is in mental health and wellness. That doesn't mean, though, that you can't manage your own symptoms on your own. It's crucial that you consult a physician if you believe that you have some sort of anxiety disorder. But it's also important that you know how to calm your mind and ease your anxiety. Following will be several ways that you can do it. Deep breathing. One of the physical symptoms of anxiety is difficulty breathing. When you're too anxious, it will often lead to you gasping for air, and that's because your heart is racing fast as a result of stress and worry. One way you can regulate anxiety is by doing some deep breathing exercises on a regular basis. When people are anxious, they often take rapid, shallow breaths known as thoracic breathing. This results in a reduction in the levels of oxygen in your body, which may lead to muscle tension and dizziness. The next time you feel that anxiety is about to kick in, try to perform this simple breathing technique to keep you relaxed. Sit with your eyes closed and focus on your breathing. Try to breathe naturally, inhaling slowly through your nostrils while keeping your shoulders relaxed. Your abdomen should expand with your chest rising slowly as you do this. Remember to relax and not to attempt to control your breathing at all. Be aware of the sensation of the air you're breathing as it enters and leaves your system. Place your right hand on your abdomen and your left hand on your chest, and take a deep breath, holding it in for about 4 to 5 seconds before inhaling. Feel your belly as you inhale. It should go in as you inhale and move out as you exhale. Forget everything else and just focus on your breathing. Your mind may begin to be very busy, but you're actually simply becoming more aware of how busy your thoughts are. Make every effort to resist the temptation of following new thoughts as they come. And once again, simply focus on the sensation you get from breathing. Every time you notice your mind wandering off, direct it to your breathing immediately. Do this as many times as you can until your mind learns how to settle on your breathing. Make this a daily habit, and you'll soon feel relaxed every time you are stressed and about to get anxious. Meditation. Much research has been done on the effects of meditation on mental health. One study in particular proved that mindfulness meditation can ease anxiety and mental stress. While it's true that most of the thoughts that cause anxiety are somewhat intrusive and cannot be simply told to go away, it's also true that the mind can somehow be taught to remain calm when in the presence of chaos and turmoil. For instance, if you have ever experienced a panic attack, you know how scary it can be to be at a point where it makes you feel like you are having a heart attack or even think that you are dying. But then, that's your mind playing tricks on you. The key to settling your mind and keeping it free from such tricks is to meditate. Mindfulness meditation involves breathing techniques, and as mentioned in the previous point, deep breathing is very powerful when it comes to calming the mind. When you're stressed and anxious, you tend to overbreathe, and this can lead to a panic attack or may worsen it if you're experiencing one. Learn how to perform mindfulness meditation and practice it on a regular basis. You can start your day with it, spending even just around 10 minutes as soon as you wake up. You'll be amazed at how such a simple exercise can have a huge impact on your mood throughout the day. Financial management. You may be asking, what does financial management have to do with anxiety? Well, to answer that question, ask yourself what area of your life gives you the most stress. There's a 99% chance you would say that it's money, and that regardless of whether you are rich or not. There's just something about money that brings stress, and that shouldn't be the case. Instead of money controlling you, you should be the one controlling money. Financial stress is a very common reason people go through therapy. Riches keep people up at night in the same way that debt does. But that's only if you don't know how to handle your finances and the stresses that they bring. The point here is that if you can keep your finances in check, you can keep your mental health in check. One thing you can do is to take charge of your finances. This means tracking down your daily expenses and quitting spending on non-essentials. What's interesting is that many of the things we spend money for are the ones that are causing us mental problems. Internet, cable, gadgets, clothes, etc. If you can minimize your spending on these things, you can be hitting two birds with one stone. Decluttering. Clutter can be costly. Imagine how much time you spend simply by looking for a lost key. Now, imagine how much stress that brings. According to research, clutter can cause feelings of fatigue, stress, and eventually depression. A study done in the University of California, in particular, found that mothers who lived in homes that can be described as cluttered and full of unfinished projects had higher levels of the stress hormone cortisol. How do you know if the environment you're living in is cluttered? That's the sign that you already need to declutter. The answer is stress. When stress is starting to become unbearable at home or in the workplace, there's a huge chance that it's because of all the clutter present in your surroundings. When you can say to yourself that your stress is a result of all the clutter around you, it's definitely time for you to declutter. There are countless books and internet videos that can teach you how to declutter your home or workplace. It all starts with developing a philosophy of minimalism. But there are also practical steps that you can work on for a start. The only thing you need is a system. The best approach is to go from room to room, dividing all your stuff into 4 categories: things to donate, things to keep, things to store, and things to throw away. If you don't actually need it, consider giving it or throwing it away. Next, go through each of your boxes and find a place for all your stuff. Ideally, you should keep your stuff in the same area where it is needed. Keys, for example, should be hung by the door. Finish one area or room at a time. Before you move on to the next room, make sure you're done sorting out all your stuff in the other room. That way, you are more systematic in your approach, which will help prevent stress at the same time. Taking a day off. Our society has placed an excessive importance on productivity, to the point that we no longer have any time, even just for one day of rest. We need to understand that our body was not designed to run 24/7, which is why we need to get enough sleep at night. 8 hours of sleep every night is not enough, though. In order for the body to heal and recuperate from all the work it's doing, it has to have at least one day each week to rest. Many would say that they do have 2 days of rest, Saturday and Sunday. But true rest is not simply physical rest. Yes, you may not be doing any actual work on the weekends, but if you're honest enough, you will admit that you don't stop thinking about work on those 2 days. And thinking about work is the same thing as doing work. That said, true rest day or day off is making the commitment that you will not think about work during your days off or during weekends. You are lucky if you are given 2 days to rest. It's also a good thing that there are companies now that require their employees to report only 4 days a week. But again, remember that the secret to reducing stress is not simply to rest physically, but also mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. During your days off, make it a habit of not talking or thinking about work. Spend time during those days meditating or reflecting about life. Enjoy the company of your family. Seize the moment by taking time off from technology and spending time with nature. You will be amazed at how this practice of true rest will impact your mental health. Getting enough sleep. We've been told over and over again to get at least 8 hours of sleep at night, and for good reason. Sleep deprivation is one of the major reasons that people develop stress and anxiety. According to research, not getting enough sleep at night amplifies the anticipatory reactions of the brain, and this pushes anxiety levels up over time. Anticipatory anxiety is not bad. In fact, all human beings have it. It's important that a person has a moderate level of anxiety about doing well. It only becomes destructive when it begins to impact your life in a negative way. It's just not possible for a person to have healthy emotional function without adequate sleep. Keep in mind that the hours you don't spend sleeping don't roll over. Every time you sleep late at night and only get 4 to 5 hours of sleep in a 24-hour cycle, there is no way for you to redeem the lost hours you were supposed to be resting. So do your best to get ample sleep. If it's not your habit to sleep early at night, it's time that you start making it one. Start by eliminating any possible factor that might be contributing to your being a night owl. For instance, You may need to cut back on coffee and limit your consumption to 1 cup a day, scheduling your drink in the morning rather than in the afternoon. You may also need to eat less at night, since overeating before bedtime makes it difficult for you to fall asleep, as your brain is still active, helping your digestive system break down all the food you ate. Do this for a week, and over time, your body clock will adjust, and you will find yourself sleeping and waking up at the same hours of the day every time. Watching your diet. A large percentage of the population struggle with anxiety, and yet not a lot understand the importance of the role that diet plays in terms of anxiety management. In addition to eating a healthy, balanced diet, staying hydrated, and limiting or avoiding caffeine and alcohol, there are a number of other dietary considerations that can help with anxiety. Complex carbohydrates, for instance, metabolize more slowly and are therefore better in helping maintain a healthy blood sugar level that promotes a calmer feeling. In the same manner, a diet rich in vegetables, fruits, and whole grains is a better option than a diet rich in simple carbohydrates, often found in processed foods. When you eat is also just as important as what you eat. That said, it's important not to skip meals. Skipping a meal randomly may result in drops in blood sugar levels that may worsen any anxiety you already have. Since around 95% of serotonin receptors are in the gut-brain axis also plays an important part. This is the reason that much research is being done right now in the potential of probiotics for the treatment of anxiety. Challenging negative core beliefs. Feelings are always preceded by thoughts, so whatever thoughts you have that may be contributing to your anxiety, they must be put in check. But how do negative thoughts contribute to anxiety? For one, negative thoughts lead to negative emotions, which eventually lead to negative behaviors. For instance, you wake up in the morning and immediately think that you're going to have a bad day. That thought will make you want to just stay in bed all day, which in turn will produce in you feelings of sluggishness and nervousness. Now that you feel unmotivated, you also begin to feel guilty that you're not productive at all. This becomes a cycle, one you would want to break free from. In order for that to happen, you need to challenge your negative mood. You can start by recording your thoughts every now and then, paying special attention to times when you are unusually stressed out. Write the feelings that accompany your thoughts every time you are stressed. They could be feelings of anger, frustration, helplessness, or defeat. Next, challenge your version of reality. Is it true that you don't deserve that raise? Or is it true that no one's going to hire you? What is the proof that your colleagues don't like you? Commit to recording your thoughts and feelings on a daily basis and test them as to whether they are factual or not. You will realize that many of the negative feelings that you have created in your mind have no actual basis. The best part of all of this is that since the negative thoughts you have been thinking were simply created by you, they can also be uncreated by you. Practicing gratitude. There is such a thing as toxic positivity, or the concept that focusing on positive emotions and rejecting anything that may trigger negative thoughts and feelings is the right approach to be truly happy in life. While positive thinking plays an important role in managing anxiety, ignoring the fact that you are facing challenges and experiencing stress and anxiety is not a good solution at all. At the same time, however, as you acknowledge all the hardships you're going through on a daily basis, see to it that you don't forget how to see the brighter side of your circumstances. Make it a habit of making a mental note of the good things in your life. Being thankful and grateful, even just for the fact that you are alive, won't eliminate your problems, but it will help you to see things from a much bigger perspective. Accepting the fact that you have anxiety. Just as it is with any other health condition, the only way for you to treat your anxiety is by acknowledging the truth that you indeed have anxiety. Of course, you'll need to go through a series of medical tests before you can know whether or not you have any form of anxiety disorder. But once you feel that something is not right with the level of anxiety and fear that you have as a response to daily stressors, and you don't admit that anything is wrong with you, then you will have a hard time dealing with your condition. On the other hand, if you believe that you may have an anxiety disorder and readily submit yourself into the care of a physician, then you're taking the first step to receiving treatment and the possibility of recovering fully from your symptoms. And whether you find out that your anxiety is inherited or is a result of your current lifestyle, accept the fact that you have it. Only by doing so will you have a better chance of managing your anxiety. Scheduling a trip to the therapist. Finally, don't hesitate to have yourself assessed by a mental health professional if you believe that you're suffering from an anxiety disorder. Such conditions can be treated with psychotherapy, medication, or a combination of both. You can decide to live with your condition and not seek treatment if you have been diagnosed with a mild anxiety disorder with symptoms that can easily be managed. However, if your case is severe, your best option is to see a mental health therapist right away. Nobody deserves a life that is crippled by stress, fear, and worry. Schedule a trip to the nearest therapist to receive treatment. While anxiety usually doesn't go away, particularly if it's severe, you can rest assured that a therapist can help you learn to manage symptoms so that you can still live a happy and healthy life. Conclusion. Anxiety is your body's response to stress. And since stress is inevitable, so is anxiety. However, this also means that the more stress you experience on a daily basis, the higher your risk for developing anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders should not be taken lightly. In severe cases, they can keep you from doing the things that give your life meaning, studying, working, and building and enjoying relationships. That said, it is of utmost importance that you have your mental health evaluated if you feel that you are experiencing stress and anxiety that are beyond the levels that science considers normal. The earlier you are assessed and any anxiety disorder you may have is diagnosed, the better your chances of being able to manage your symptoms and live a quality life. With the help of recent research, doctors and therapists are now more equipped and capable when it comes to dealing with mental health issues. So you can rest assured that there is an answer to your anxiety disorder, no matter how severe your case may be.